All right. Good morning, Geauga County, Lake County. Oh, wait a minute. Let me turn off my other set of mics. Let me try this again. Good morning, Geauga County, Lake County, Northeastern Ohio, all around the world. You are listening to the voice of Geauga, and actually, voice of Northeastern Ohio, for that matter. And today we're going to be talking about the voice of kind of national society, whatever. We got a topic that impacts us. We live in a jewel here in Geauga County, and we welcome anybody that wants to escape
If we can keep it.
that's right, the goofiness that goes on in some of our more, um, dare I say, liberal communities. But and I'll give a couple of examples of that. But good morning. You are listening to the Voice of Jaga with Jonathan Broadbent, Skip
Good
Claypool,
morning, all.
and I've invited my son Trevor Claypool, former Marine, retired Marine. Um, never a former Marine. You're always a Marine, apparently. I don't
Once a
know.
Marine, always a
I
Marine.
was in the Air Force. I left the Air Force. I'm no longer Air Force, but he's still a Marine. Um, I proudly recognize my military experience, but I don't know that there's an identity. Like the Marines have this strong identification with, they were brainwashed way more than the Air Force was, and so that's
Brainwashed.
all I will say. And we had some
No, they
this
called into a life of duty.
we had some conversations last night. We went out to dinner at the Red Hawk Inn over in um, Con- Concord. Ran into I think he was an Army guy. Was it an Army guy? Navy guy. Oh yeah, Navy guy. And we had a military conversation. Anyway, that's off topic. Sorry for that tangent. But if you want to take part in today's program, you can call us at 4404-946-9468. We encourage you to give us a call if you agree, disagree, and just want to babble on the program. We have live stream on Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube, and we're always watching our chat audiences to get their input and thoughts on things. So today we were going to have a little bit of a conversation about what's going on in our society, and it does impact us. We have kind of a unique situation here in Geauga County that we have an Amish community, and that Amish community is changing a bit, I would say, from what it was a few decades ago. But for the most part, um, the Amish community does not engage in the media. They don't watch a lot of TV, so they're not influenced by a lot of the movies that are out there, or some of the TV shows, or even the news for that matter. And so they tend to read a lot more newspapers and get their news in different ways. And so you can see their society as a more calm, peaceful, um, more God fearing group. Whereas if you look at the rest of society, I was watching the news last night, and we've got these protesters up in New Jersey, and they're screaming the most ridiculous, goofy things. And they're making these claims that are just outlandish in terms of ICE agents who are law enforcement created by our Congress and funded by our Congress. And then you've got
There's your brainwashing.
then you've got that's right. Then you've got Congress people standing up and opposing the people that they created and funded to protect us from people who are criminals that we put into ICE facilities. It makes no sense. We're living in a world I don't understand, as I echo Mr. Trivisano, who used to be on, and a lot of us listened to him, loved his program. And
Yeah.
it was a good guy. But we're watching all this nonsense going on, and it kind of comes back to I think the root of it all is actually the destruction of our families that started with the liberal social programs, welfare, and so on and so forth, which incentivized people to break apart their families, single family, mother families, and that kind of stuff. And so I bring it all back to a destruction of, number one, religion, taking religion out of our homes, and the destruction of the family, the two, a mother and a father family structure. Um, you don't have the some of the values that we used to have decades ago. I knew when I was growing up, censorship actually existed. They actually censored TV programs. And so, you shot the gun out of somebody's hand. You never shot and killed them. And today, when you're watching movies, what do you see? They make things as realistic as possible. You shoot somebody, you see the blood spurting out of somebody's head. You see people, cutting people's heads off. You see the most god awful and ridiculous. I try to avoid most of those more violent programs, but
Smart.
that comes into our society. Same thing with computer games. A lot of the computer games, and I don't do computer games personally. My kids used to do Doom all the kind, which I objected to. My wife got me to back off because I was going to ban it in our house. But
Well, Skip, at least back in the day, Doom, you were running around shooting up clearly
aliens,
alien-looking figures.
animals. That's right.
Yeah, but now the graphic violence it has spread not only with the special effects are outrageous. I mean, it really does. It makes it appear as if you're watching real death happen real time. And now it used to be, as you said, Skip, it was censored and it was rated. So you had, rated PG, PG-13, rated G for little kids, rated R, and now virtually everything. And with recent moves over the past 6 or so years, even just graphic pornographic material is pushed into K through 12. There are a very large, unfortunately, a very large group of people that don't understand the distinction between adult and child, and they push what should be adult content onto children from the graphic violence to pornographic material, and it has an impact. It has a designed impact that I hope to get into in today's discussion.
Yeah, I mean, this happens in various levels. I mean, I'm participating right now in a conversation. I, I guess you could call it a conversation on Nextdoor. I made a comment about the fact that we need to elect moral, ethical people, and that's taken a number of tangents because there's a bunch of skip haters out there. And so, why don't you just go away? Why don't you just stop destroying our county? Geez, let me think here for a second. So, let's elect moral and ethical people. And that's
That's
destroying the
destroying the
county.
county.
That's because there's no critical thinking skills. And it comes back to, yeah, we're talking kind of about violence, but also the inability to have a rational, reasonable, reasoned conversation based on reality, not based on some. You see these people shouting in the ICE officers' faces, "You're a Nazi! You know," and then all these ridiculous things. And these ICE officers,
Because they're
I don't know how they keep their cool, to be honest with you, with the
But
ridiculous stuff that
Skip,
they're
let's
shouting at
pause
someone.
to point out the irony. The same people who get out and actually, I'll give credit where credit's due. The no kings things, as ridiculous they are, have tended not to be nearly as violent and destructive as many of the other far left movements. Many of them end up with destroyed cities, burned out buildings, harassed and tormented police, and people smashed and bashed and looting stores. And the mayhem of many of the other movements has been outrageous. The no kings is just ridiculous. It's just almost comical in its irony. But those same people who say, no kings, you can't have kings, don't recognize the irony of having laws. We actually have laws, and we have people that we pay as a society to enforce those laws, like police, ICE agents, FBI, and different agencies of law enforcement. But those same people that want quote unquote no kings want to bypass the laws that we have enacted through our legislature. Quite literally, we voted people into office who voted for laws that should have been enforced to maintain borders and order and law and order. And as we try to bring about law and order, those same no kings people are like, no, whatever you do, don't enforce the laws.
Yeah, I mean
It's
that's
insanity.
Sherrod Brown, by the way, who's being considered for our U.S. Senate. Used to be
Oh,
that you
good
would hold
grief.
these people up, the people in our government, on a pedestal because they were supposed to be above, more intellectual, more caring, more integrity, more morals, but apparently not so much. If you look at some of the people who are actually running for office in office today, AOC, Bernie Sanders. I mean, I could go through a whole litany. Thank goodness there was a trend today. I'm seeing the guy from California. What's his name? He's running against Bass and the other wacko Marxist, that lady that's running over there. He's actually gaining ground, and so you're seeing this trend.
Yeah.
And Texas, we just tossed out Green and a couple of other crazies. Which I refer to as crazies, but you don't see rational conversation. So across the board, I mean, there's a very popular series that's out now called Reacher. I don't know if you've seen any of those shows. And there's a,
Skip, we're coming up on a break. I'm going to step in
all
here
right.
and remind people follow us on Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube. We are live right now. Join the conversation or call in to join the conversation 440 946 9468. We'll come back with more on the other side of the break.
Mics are off. Mics are off.
Good morning, everybody on our social media platforms. By the way, my son and I went over to Fig Tree yesterday, which is a coffee shop in Chesterland. And my son is an expert on coffee. And so he's trying to teach me how to properly create a pour over coffee, which I failed at this morning. I made the water 200 degrees as I thought it was going to be. I tried to create a bloom inside of my coffee filter, and it didn't bloom. It went flat. And I got really thin, weak coffee. So I went back to my K cup and Carrick and and brewed my out of a cup K cup coffee from Costco. But
Experts in overstatement.
and so yeah, he can do he carries around this little gadget which is makes espresso, and there's a whole process. I can't afford a half an hour in the morning to try and grind, pack, blend all the coffee and everything. But to those people that are out there, if you go by the Fig Tree in Chesterland, and I'm giving them free advertising, it's a really cool shop. They import coffee from all over the world, and sometimes it takes 6 months lead time. They order a specific variety of coffee. It takes 6 months, or even a year. They have to order it that far ahead to get it in, and then they roast the beans and then sell them actually at a pretty reasonable price. And it's really different coffee from your local restaurant or Starbucks or wherever. It's
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
so I should probably say
Yeah.
that on the radio, but it's actually pretty cool. There was also the budget hearing yesterday, and there was some excitement in that budget hearing, which we
yeah, we got to hear about that.
might talk about.
We'll try and find a segue and bring that up.
10 seconds. 10 seconds.
All right.
Welcome back to Voice of Geauga with Skip Claypool, and his son Trevor is joining us again in studio with Skip this morning, and me, Jonathan Broadbent. I want to introduce a concept, and this actually came out in a discussion. I was sharing before the show with Skip a conversation that took place at a dinner that I went to last night. We were talking about the impact of some of the very adult content, like watching what appear to be real beheadings and murders and just the gross graphic stuff, and the impact that has on children, especially children who grow up seeing a lot of it, and it starts to feel normalized, and they become numb to it. In that conversation, I mentioned an interview that I saw years ago that had an impact on me. I've shared it with many people that I know. The interview actually took place in the 1980s with Prince, the music recording artist Prince. I happen to be a big fan of Prince. I'm still heartbroken that we lost him at such a young age. I loved his music, and he was really a creative guy. But in this interview, Prince is asked about the content and how he sort of conducts his life. And he was referencing a current horror movie at the time. And he refused to name it. He said, I'm not going to give the name because I don't want to give credit to it because I know that I have enough of a following that people will go out and watch the movie if I bring it up. So I'm just going to mention it as the horror movie. There was a big horror movie that was being watched and everybody was talking about it at the time in the 1980s. And Prince said, I have no interest in seeing that movie and I won't watch it. And he relayed this story about an exchange he had with a friend of his. And he said, he asked his friend, did you go and see the horror movie? And his friend said, yes. And Prince said, tell me one of the scenes that stands out. And the guy said something like, oh, the bad guy crept up through the woods and chopped this woman or something. Told this story. And Prince asked him, do you think you'll ever forget that scene? And the guy said, well, no, I'll remember that for the rest of my life. And Prince said, you're planting things, you're putting things in your mind that you cannot unsee. You are filling your mind with filth and garbage and these destructive things. Those things grow in your mind. And I thought that was an amazing interview, and I loved Prince's perspective on that. And there does come a point, I can say that, like many other people, I saw perhaps more than my normal fill of graphic, violent content and otherwise. But I decided for myself personally a long time ago that I acknowledge that exists in the world, but I don't really want to put it in my brain. And I think we should go back to a time and reacquire rating system for children. Let's go back to G and PG-13 and R, especially in K through 12. I'm still holding that argument, as infuriating as it may be to some. Yes, there is content that is pornographic. And if you put it into a book and hand it to a 5-year-old via a school teacher or library or librarian, yes, it is still pornographic material. I'm not some sort of wild prude for saying that, so stop accusing me of it. It's insanity to argue otherwise. And literally, we have people who have gone so far in the other direction that they will not acknowledge very, very graphic content of all sorts of different natures and seem to have just tacitly agreed. It doesn't matter. You can, sure, just put it in front of a 5-year-old. And the horror stories that ensue and the destruction to society is catastrophic. Right, Skip?
So yeah, and I'll ask my son to chime in because I'm sure he's got a thought on this. But I wanted to reach out and shout out to Stu, who's listening to the program today. He was a little bored.
Oh, there's
He
your
was a little
buddy.
bored. We were recommending the Fig Tree Coffee Shop in Chesterland, Ohio. Free advertisement for them. They do fantastic job importing coffee from all over the world and roasting it and then providing it to people. So stop by the Fig Tree and Chesterland. You'll have a good experience. I also want to mention our other sponsors, Anonymous. He won't say who he is, he she, but and then the VFW from Chardon and Middlefield, and the American Legion out of Chardon and Newberry. We thank them for being our sponsors. You too can be a sponsor of this program and help us to remain on the air and talk about all the goofy things we talk about and entertain you and get you awake and stimulated in the morning like Stu. If Stu would just call us and have a conversation with us, we could maybe figure out what's in his brain. And that would be a very interesting experience. I am absolutely sure. But one of the things in this topic that I'm concerned about is, we talked earlier in the program about absentee parents, the fact that our society has kind of been wrecked by the liberal mindset, the social programs that we created in the 60s that were supposed to save society, a little bit like Obamacare is supposed to save healthcare, and it's destroying it or destroyed it. But the impact of not having parents at home watching their kids means oftentimes the parents use TV as a babysitter, and TV has been progressively getting more violent and more violent. We now have a series out there. It's very popular called Reacher. If anybody's watched the program, it's actually very entertaining. The problem that I have with that program, and I've got an issue with it, is that Reacher goes around wantonly murdering people, and he's the judge and jury, so he determines what's right and wrong, and that he's going to cure kill the bad guy, and does it without any issue. So kids see that, and what is the value they take away from that particular program? And you see other similar programs like there's another popular program with Denzel Washington. Um,
The
what is
Equalizer.
the Equalizer, where he does the same thing. He's judge and jury. He determines what's right and wrong. There's no due process
I hate to
from.
admit it, Skip, but you're right. I actually love those. I'm a huge fan of Denzel Washington. He's probably my favorite actor. I've watched all his movies, and I love those movies. But you're right; those should clearly be marked as not content for children. In fact, actually, anymore, I probably wouldn't rewatch those. But then you've got that Bob Odenkirk, Nobody. He's got that series of movies called Nobody. So vigilanteism has grown a lot in sort of the public eye. At the same time, we have a, what I consider to be a significant push and movement toward more violent society. At the same time, we have a huge push to defund police, take police out of the equation, create a revolving door of an overly lenient judicial system. It constantly seems to put really bad actors back out on the street, and then include this growing uh, roster of vigilanteism. And what we end up with is a society that's constantly fighting itself and has violent and growing crime, which is where we are.
Well, yeah, and then you see, I mean, what is the impact of that? You see Charlie Kirk murdered under the guise
Yeah.
of, the young guy was, deciding himself what was justice, what was right, what was wrong. And we already know that the liberal mindset is really goofy, and so their judgment and those kinds of things is probably not too good. So they're making, critical thinking skills. And you see these women coming out and supporting the guy who shot the pharmaceutical CEO in New York, and like he's some sort of a hero or something because of the goofy thinking that's created. So it's a very big
Well,
concern in our society. I'm not sure what the answer to it is.
it,
I will highlight real quick, and then you can jump in there, or I'll ask Trevor to jump in. There is a series out there called Ted Lasso, which is all about a soccer coach in New York is an American that goes to England to become a soccer coach. He's never taught or never coached soccer in his life. He's a football coach, but he goes, and there's a whole series. But it is actually very kind of brings us back to a basic set of morals and integrity, and he kind of teaches that through the series, and it's actually a fun program. I don't like some of the sexual innuendo in the program, and some other goofiness, but
are you saying the show stops at just sexual innuendo and doesn't dive right into the much more pornographic? Wow,
yeah,
that's
it's
a break from the current
a
norm.
lot of
I did want to
innuendo.
interject that I have a good friend who follows the show, who makes comments regularly on balance. And it's fair and true to say that there's a tremendous amount of propaganda and brainwashing, but it's on both sides. You have the propaganda on the right, and we have to be on the lookout for it. We
Can
have people
can you give me an
working.
example of propaganda from the right?
Well, I'm going to point people to resources. um, you won't like some of my answers, Skip, but I'm going to point people to some
Okay, it's
resources.
not like we
Go.
ever disagree, Jonathan.
That's true. It's a good point. We have had some pretty solid, strong disagreements on some things. Um, but I suggest going to, and you can do a search. I recommend Brave because I don't like Google, but do a search online for tools to learn how to spot propaganda. Patrick Wood, who started Citizens for Free Speech, has a series called Citizen Ninja. It teaches you right, left, wherever you are, to get a sense for when people are trying to steer you using emotion into a certain behavior. So I see it all the time. I see it often from the left. I can point to lots and lots of examples. There is propaganda that is being pushed on the American mind on both sides, and ultimately it boils down to how to defeat America without firing a single shot. And it has everything to do with pitting us against each other. The more you realize that, and the more you recognize that, the more we recognize that, the more we can come together. From these perceived groups, white versus black, men versus women, rich versus poor. All these narratives are designed to fracture, divide, and conquer us. We're going to come back with more, and during the break, I may try and find some examples and post them on social media when we return with more Voice of Geauga.
My friend.
Mics are off. Mics are off.
So we
Yeah,
got
so,
some
I
we
mean,
got some comments.
ultimately,
Well, we
you-
might
you-
want to highlight there, Jonathan, on Rumble. We've got some people who are throwing a lot of comments on us, and they asked if we were watching. So I just will point that out to you.
We're funding radical education, that is correct. And it was designed, it wasn't completely universally top down. However, education over the last 70 plus years has moved much more and more to the federal Department of Education to set standards, who then used money to influence states. Then states have controlled these school districts through money. So in Ohio, for instance, there are only 4 ed tech choices that are permitted in Ohio's government-run K through 12 education system. And people like me track the owner groups behind those ed tech companies. And overwhelmingly, you have 2 primary publishers in America, McGraw-Hill and Pearson Publishing. Pearson Publishing, when people like me root around it to determine the owner group, I figured out that Pearson Publishing, while housed in London, England, is actually majority owned, by a series of hedge funds. And the hedge funds are primarily owned by very wealthy Middle Eastern oil-rich families, which means that it's a legitimate argument, has leaned heavily toward Middle East and embracing Muslim value systems and opposing Jewish value systems. So you see that in content, and there are actually some successful court cases, including some cases in California relating to Pearson publishing content that was then put out into K through 12 that had some very clear anti-Semitic content. They've actually, of all places, California, successfully battled and got some books removed and then altered and then republished because they were blatantly anti-Semitic. So the argument continues to be the reason that it was able to foment and grow as it was is because Pearson Publishing is majority owned by Middle Eastern families embracing Muslim values. So those are the kinds of things Skip and I've talked a number of times about how to track those sorts of things. Look into the money, not only the owner groups, but the flow of money. What money is being put into what initiatives and by whom? And it helps to start tracking the intended disruption or destruction of society. And yes, I'm using that term intentionally because there are some bad actors out there, and we see them a lot. We talk now pretty openly as a society about George Soros, about the what's it called, Open Societies Foundation, and a number of other. Who's the Swiss billionaire who has pledged his money to destroy America and funnels it into American politicians. So there are people, unfortunately, in America who are perfectly
30
willing
seconds. 30 seconds.
to take money in the pursuit of the destruction of America. And I mean, look at Iran for decades chanting death to America. So there's a lot of money that flows into and swirls around the prospect of destroying us. And to turn a blind eye to that and pretend like this aren't connected to the content that's being delivered to children, especially
10
on social
seconds.
media.
10 seconds.
Welcome back to Voice of Geauga with Skip Claypool, and joining him again today for the second day in a row in studio with Skip, his son Trevor. Welcome back, Trevor. And I'm Jonathan Broadbent. Ultimately, what we're talking about is the intentional, and yes, I do believe it's the intentional destruction of the pillars of society. Going bad people, bad actors, some of them with a lot of money, billionaires that we now talk about openly, who have pledged toward the destruction of America, are pumping massive amounts of money into bringing down our judicial system, our police and legal system, our pursuit of rule of law, our education systems, and certainly we've seen it in healthcare, and it goes on from there. But I want to turn it back over. Let's get some comments from Trevor's perspective.
I really have a question. Again, from yesterday's show, I come from a different worldview, and so my perspective is pointed at an underlying truth that exists.
Trevor, could you move a little bit closer to the microphone, please?
Yeah,
Not picking you up.
I should probably use my Marine voice.
There you go.
It just projects so it makes it to the microphone. Sorry, Jonathan. What I was saying was I come from a bit different worldview, oftentimes, than the secular perspective. And so my perspective is oftentimes shaped by biblical principles. And if we go back to Bible and Proverbs 22, you're going to find a verse that says, raise children up in the way that they should go, and they will not depart from it. That's a pretty foundational perspective when it comes to how we raise our kids in every aspect of life, what they watch, what they eat, the habits you build, the time they go to bed, all of those variables. And I think getting back to this main point, I think there's an underlying issue that exists. But I would like to throw out a question, because we were talking about schools, we were talking about education. The question I would throw out is, what are the thoughts on homeschooling versus public schools? Do you guys have thoughts on that?
Well,
I've got a lot of thoughts on that and years of research,
Yeah.
but I think Skip wanted to comment.
yeah, I mean, I think that you get the quality of the education, and homeschooling is better in some cases than the public, depending on where the public school is. But you have values taught through homeschooling, so the kids don't have an opportunity to get a diverse set of viewpoints through a homeschool situation versus another, a public school situation. That's the downside. Is sometimes that diverse input. Once kids get to a certain age, they have the ability to kind of judge whether what they're listening to is good or bad, and that does have some value. So you've got to get in the homeschooling situation. You got to get. Hopefully, the parents or whoever's homeschooling are getting the kids out in more of a diverse environment around other kids where they can socialize and all that kind of stuff. But many of the people that I have seen that are homeschooled actually get probably a better education than in some public schools. And I want to say some because there's some that do a pretty good job. I've got a grandson that's going to a private boys' school, and he's getting a great education. They're challenging him and teaching him a lot of stuff. So
I would bring up, you said private boys' school, which I differentiate from public schools, which I differentiate from home schools. And so I think if we intentionally throw our children into environments that are crafted for education purposes or for the, and I don't mean this negatively, the indoctrination of ideas or principles that will better their lives, I think that's a really good conversation to have, and how we set those up and what we do with them. I asked the question about homeschools because it's on the rise, right? So there's more and more people homeschooling, and it's having more and more of an influence, but it's actually getting better and better as well. To speak to the points that you're just talking about, Dan, is the idea that now they have, groups that come together, homeschool groups, in order to bring those different cultures together in order to educate people on their different principles and ideas, and then allow them to go out into society. I think the challenge is not everybody can homeschool, right? And so, what does it look like when you can't homeschool and they have to go to a public school? And how do we deal with that? Public schools, the money that's going to them and the way that they're being shaped or indoctrinated looks a lot different than those who can probably homeschool. And I think that has an effect. I think because it's not intentionally. Well, that's not true. That's a false statement. It is intentionally designed as well. To your point earlier, Jonathan, and who's running those schools behind the scenes, and so I asked about homeschooling, Jonathan. I'd be really interested because you said you've done studies on your input on the homeschooling versus public schooling idea.
But
Yeah, there have been some
but-
significant moves to bring parents' rights back into the home, and those are heavily opposed by teachers' unions. Teachers' unions, just by nature of states like Ohio, effectively mandating that teachers' salaries be deducted and some of the money go to the teachers' union, have ended up overly wealthy, overly powerful, and overly influential. By the way, that's a side note. There is a 4-part docuseries coming out called Bad Apples
Hmm.
that has everything to do with teachers' unions' influence over curriculum and education. I actually am in that. It hasn't released yet. The fourth of that 4-part series is not yet in the can. But I want to get to the meat of the matter. I think, Skip, with all due respect, I think that when we think about, and perhaps when you think about homeschool versus government run schools, your perspective may be locally shaped and perhaps a little bit outdated. What's been happening in K through 12 over the past couple of decades has turned from bad to worse to catastrophic. On a national level, we know things now as a society like a roughly 30% literacy rate for our nation. We also can judge ourselves as a nation compared to other nations and figure out that while we spend close to the most amount per child, and that often locally is 20, 30, or $40,000 per pupil, we rank nearly last place. There are places in the world that are little more than a mud hut with a chalkboard that are beating us at preparing children for proper life and education. So when it comes to that choice and looking at it like a fork in the road, send your kids on the yellow bus to government run schools or find an alternative, that has taken a tremendous turn for the better because of COVID. COVID ultimately turned out to have a silver lining. Many, many families across the US saw what was happening. They looked over their kids' their shoulders during that remote learning. That's what they called it. And they looked at the screens, and parents in the United States balked. They pointed their finger and said, "Shame on you. We had no idea how bad it was." And parents pulled their kids out of government run schools and found all sorts of creative answers: pods, micro schools, homeschool, co-ops, you name it. They scraped together a means of getting education to their children. Well, here's where it gets really exciting. Skip, you'll be pleased to know that the results are in. When kids leave government schools and go elsewhere, fill in the blank, any of those A, B, C, D, E, F, G, when they go somewhere else, overwhelmingly, it's not universal, but it's overwhelming evidence that they do much, much better in any other environment outside of the government run schools, which means they're eliminating a lot of the antagonism, a lot of the division, pitting kids against each other, and it's gotten really, really bad in many schools. And that has everything to do with content as well. But here's the thing, and Trevor, I'm trying as quickly as I can to get to a really meaty point on this. We see huge rise in academic proficiency and success once kids leave school. However, in keeping with the agenda of the left, let's break it down by demographic. The Asian kids, when they leave school, government run schools, they do better. The white kids, they do better still. Middle Eastern and Latino children do much, much better across the board, boys and girls, when they leave government run schools. Black kids, astronomically better. It is a meteoric rise, and they're very quickly, within a period of 3 to 5 years, on par with other demographics. So to me, I've been saying this, it's unpleasant and unpopular as the statement is, that systemic racism we keep hearing about, I believe we have absolutely unequivocally found it. It's in K through 12 education. It is an environment that is a breeding ground for mistreatment and abuse of children, and very primarily and specifically Black children. I believe that the data is impenetrable and shows unequivocally that the kids, not only the kids that leave, do better, but if you care about young black boys and girls, do everything in your power to get them out of the government-run system. And there's one in particular I've been pointing at locally, Richmond Heights schools, the primarily black school, and look at the content that they're doing. They brought in these outside consultants. I've been talking about it for years. I could go into a whole program on this, but they brought in something they were calling Reconstruction that really had nothing to do with the Reconstruction era of history and everything to do with teaching young black boys and girls that they have no agency, that white people hate them, and it's catastrophic and awful. But I want to get back to the bright point. The bright point is that the largest number of families that left government-run education as a result of COVID is Black America. Black America saw a huge rise in homeschool, and I think that is where the silver lining is and hope for the future. We're coming into a break. We're going to continue the conversation when we come back on the other side of the break.
She does. Yeah, she does.
Mics are off. Mics are off.
All right. So yeah, I got excited about the topic there. I have not been reading Rumble. You want to interject some of those, Skip?
Yeah, I mean,
Seems like a pretty lively conversation.
There's a lot of comments. I would love to see your statistics. You can make all kinds of claims. I want to see the data because some of that makes no sense to me from a critical thinking standpoint. In addition to that, well, all these claims about meteoric rise, you get the same value system when you've got a problem, and one of the values of a public education system, you have a whole segment of the population. Homeschooling works great for people who can be at home to teach the kids and that have the wealth and they're able to do that. There's a whole population of people that can't. They're single mothers out of Cleveland. They're poor. They don't have the ability to do homeschooling because they don't, number one, have the education, number two, have the resources, and number three, they got to go to work. And so they got to do something with their kids. And so they send their kids to a public school. Public schools serve a purpose. They educate a broader segment of the population that maybe doesn't have other options. And there are real problems with some of those public schools. But we need to take a look at them and try to fix that problem and not destroy public schools. So they have a place.
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
And we want to do a broad brush and just vilify all the public schools, and I just don't agree with that.
Yeah, so Cleveland makes a good example. $42,000 per year for literacy in the teens, and it's turned into a nightmare
10
scenario.
seconds. 10 seconds.
Yeah, I would agree. Cleveland schools are not good. So before
Welcome back to Voice of Geauga with Skip Claypool, and joining us again is his son Trevor in studio with Skip and myself, Jonathan Broadbent. So during the break, Skip was questioning some of the numbers, brought up Cleveland Public Schools, and you can slot in there Baltimore schools, Toledo, Dayton, Detroit, Cincinnati, Columbus, fill in the blank school district. Overwhelmingly, you're going to find the outlay of cash under the umbrella of, gosh, we're having so much trouble with these kids. We need huge amounts of money, and that many or most need to be on special programs, letter called 504 or IEP or you name it, which opens the door to additional government dollars. So there are lots and lots of examples that address that. One is a school district that's now been uncovered by Frank McCormick from, you'll find him under Chalkboard Heresy. He's a former teacher in the Chicago area who has come out with all sorts of detailed information and investigations. You'll find it also in Accuracy in Media. So Mr. Gillette was our guest on Ohio Political News last Tuesday, and they have undercover videos from within K through 12, etc. But ultimately, the answer to your question, Skip, that came up during the break, how do people of limited means who are struggling financially make it happen? And the answer is community. You're going to find a lot of grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, you name it. If they're, when families get aware enough and concerned enough about the quality of education or lack of quality, there are vast, extraordinary numbers of families that have found the way. They've found a way by co-oping, so maybe one parent 1 day a week, and you find 5 other parents and families, so you've got whatever 6 or 8 kids, and go from house to house, family to family, and 1 day a week they're in different houses. All of those are viable. They're all on the table for families that are struggling to find access to better education. There is another piece that came out in the conversation yesterday, and this goes back to the beginning of the discussion, and that is the pursuit of law and order. In society, we see now some very far left, very liberal judges who are willing to create a revolving door of violent crime. Let people back out on the streets who have committed the worst, most heinous crimes on virtually no bail, putting them back on the streets where they're committing more crimes. Now apply that to a frequent problem within government run schools. There is very little appetite for discipline in these schools, and there are bad kids. You're going to find mass numbers of good, caring kids who want access to a good education. I had a great experience where I got introduced to that in, of all places, Cleveland. But if you have classrooms that are constantly loaded with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different kids who don't want education, and they take advantage of the lack of discipline, they're violent and disruptive, you will destroy the entire classroom. That's what we find frequently in the education environment. Remove that distraction, start implementing discipline, get kids into an environment where they have access to a real education, and kids flourish. That's what ends up happening.
Yeah, you and I are in complete agreement on it. We stepped on this landmine in education. We were supposed to be talking about the influence of violence in the society, and my son took us sideways and had to talk about education, which is Jonathan Broadbent's hot button. The minute you talk education, stand back, because we're going to get an ongoing soliloquy of all of this information on education. But I mean,
I'll
we
own
we
up to
certain
that.
we certainly have a lot of problems with our public education system, primarily in the inner city schools and large city blue, the liberal communities, unfortunately. And because they tolerate or accept or promote goofiness. I mean, look at what Mandami just did, and this is just part of the goofing thinking of the left, which is becoming far left. It was middle of the road left. Now it is just far off the charts left. Mondamini would not even participate in the Jewish celebrations coming up, and he's anti-Semitic. His family's anti-Semitic. His wife and his parents, and the goofy people in New York elected this idiot to run New York City, who wants to take over apartment complexes, destroy capitalism. I mean, oh my God. The influence that we currently have in our society makes me really concerned and really happy that I live in Geauga County. Our saving grace is that we have a smaller county, easier to maintain and to take care of, in terms of if we got bad actors, we can replace them. We just had an election that kind of proved that. And so,
More of that, please.
yeah, more of that. But we do certainly have problems in our public education system. And I'm not sure what the right answer is outside of, we've got to do a dramatic overhaul. And the teachers' unions are a big part of the problem. Um, I'm not sure exactly what to fix on that. Any public union is a problem, because public unions is a corrupt, and President Roosevelt years and years ago made this comment, and he was a Democrat, that whenever you get a public union, it's just a vicious cycle. Unions donate money to people who are going to promote unions, and so you get this big cycle in government, which is corrupt. and creates all kinds of problems. And so, but I'm not sure what the answer is to education, but I do know, back on the topic that we started with, that there's a lot of societal influences that are going in the wrong direction. And that also, I mean, we consume this stuff. People watch the Reacher movie, they watch the Equalizer movie, which are very entertaining, good actors, and so on and so forth. But the values that those teach our kids, and a lot of times TV's the babysitter, and people aren't watching, their parents aren't watching what their kids are learning. That's an issue. People no longer are accountable for guiding their kids to some degree. Some parents are much more responsible than others, and some have, other challenges, life's challenges. But that has a huge impact on our society, and I've watched it over the many, many, many years that I've lived.
I think that there's the discussion you guys brought it up at the beginning of the show, and your Rumble chat's going awesome here. I actually really enjoy reading it, and thanks for everybody who's writing in the Rumble chat. I enjoy reading what you're saying, and a lot of truth is being thrown out there. I'm not a social media guy, but this is I really appreciate it. Anyway, back on topic. You guys brought up the destruction of the family, and I think that is critical to even education inside the school system. The destruction of the family is exactly that. It's destructive. There's no growth out of the destruction of the family because it doesn't bring unity. It doesn't bring people together. And I think a lot of this has to do with the mentality. And there's and I'm drawing a blank on his name, a colonel that's out there who did a speech on three different mentalities, and he talks about the special ops community, and he talks about the difference between the special ops community and typically basic military or conventional forces is the mentality. He said, there's a I get to mentality, there's an I want to mentality, and there's an I have to mentality. I think right now in the United States we live, and this is a generalization, obviously, but I think that we live in the I have to. When I talk to people about going to work, it's the I have to mentality. They don't really want to go to work. They want to just get paid for nothing. It doesn't.
Trevor, just letting you know we've got 1 minute left.
I can talk faster, or I can come to my point quicker. Let's see.
Your choice.
I will come to the point quicker. The idea is to get to the I get to mentality, right? So I get to do this. I am blessed enough to be able to do this. I think that has to do with every topic we think about. If you're trying to dodge something because it's uncomfortable, then you're thinking about it incorrectly. The idea is that you get to do it. The idea is that we are blessed in this country, in our first world nature, to be able to do these things that somebody else has sacrificed for. And that shifts every aspect of life. But when it comes to the education of our children, it shifts the perspective our teachers have on our children have when going to school, our parents have when either homeschooling or sending their kids to school.
Unfortunately, Trevor, that concludes our show today. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday at 7 a.m.
Thanks, Jonathan.